Hi, everybody. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback here. And we have David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, Admiral William Crowe Chair, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Economics at the U.S. Naval Academy, and internationally recognized fiscal responsibility, government transformation, and retirement security expert. For those who aren't familiar with your work, David, describe your background and what you're working on now.
Thanks, Josh. It's good to be with you. I have over 40 years of executive level experience in the private sector, public sector, and not-for-profit sector. I'm a certified public accountant by training. I worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers and was a global partner with Arthur Andersen. I've run 3 federal agencies, 2 in the executive branch, 1 in the legislative branch. Most recently, Comptroller General of the United States, which is Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I've been a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. I've run 2 not-for-profits. And most recently, I was a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy teaching the economics of national security. Now I do a lot of speaking and writing, and I'm on a number of government not-for-profit boards, including the Defense Business Board, which is for the Defense Department, which spends over $700 billion a year and obviously is important, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a national security perspective.
Now, recently you spoke to the brigade as the featured speaker in the Economics Department's Critical Crossroads lecture series on America's fiscal future and the impact of COVID-19. What was the impact of COVID-19 on our fiscal structure?
Well, the impact was a number of dimensions. One, obviously, had a serious adverse impact on the economy, on unemployment, which we're starting to recover from. In addition to that, it had a serious adverse impact on spending, meaning it resulted in a significant increase in federal spending. And furthermore, it ended up resulting in an acceleration of the estimated date of exhaustion of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. And importantly, those dates are likely to accelerate further because we still haven't achieved full economic recovery. And now we face an inflation problem, which, as you know, Social Security benefits are indexed to inflation. And furthermore, healthcare costs grow much faster than inflation and much faster than the economy.
So what do we do? I mean, are we doomed? I remember you talking 10 years ago. Was it the Peter Peterson Foundation or the Peter G. Peterson?
Yeah, I was the first chief executive officer of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which still exists. And, Pete was a great man. May God rest his soul. But let me give you a few numbers that will put things in context. In the year 2000, the federal government had total liabilities and unfunded promises of about $20 trillion. And in that year, GDP, gross domestic product of the United States, was about $10.25 trillion. So in other words, our total liabilities and unfunded promises were roughly double what GDP was. In 2020, our total liabilities and unfunded promises were $102 trillion, and GDP was only about $20.9 trillion. So, the GDP has only gone up twice, but our total liabilities and unfunded promises have gone up 5 times during that period of time. And what's more important is what's projected to happen on our current path going forward. We're projected to be in third world nation status with regard to debt to GDP if we don't end up changing course. And yet you have people in Washington now that want to grow government further, and they say, well, don't worry because we're going to pay for all our new promises. Well, guess what? That's not acceptable, because if you pay for your new promises and you don't know how you're going to pay for the $102 trillion that you've already made, I'd call that pretty damn dumb.
Yeah, I would too. We are with arguably the foremost expert in the country on America's fiscal cliff. We've had Lawrence J. Kotlikoff on the show, Barry Dyke, others who I believe are you doing a new video with them? I heard there's some.
I do. Well, I do documentaries all the time, and I know Larry and I know Barry. We're friends. We all are very concerned about this issue. I just wish more politicians were concerned about it, because unfortunately we have too many politicians that are living for today rather than trying to take steps to help create a better tomorrow. And history says that doesn't end well.
So what do we do? I mean, I remember your work at the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. I remember you on the radio, even before I was on the radio, like 15 years ago. I heard you on a Philly station decrying our national debt and all the problems. Is there any hope? I mean, are we getting through to anybody?
Absolutely, there's hope. Yeah, absolutely, there's hope. I mean, first, the American people are a lot smarter than the politicians realize. They understand that you can't spend more money than you make, charge it to the credit card, self-deal in your own debt without having a day of reckoning. And that's what we're doing right now. And quite frankly, it's getting worse, not better. And so the first thing that we have to do is, when you're in a hole, you got to quit digging. And sometimes you have to do things because you face a national emergency, whether that be from a military standpoint, whether that be from an economic recession standpoint, or whether that be from a public health crisis. But what you can't do is you can't continue to spend more than you take in indefinitely, increase debt burdens, increase interest costs, and lose control of the budget to an increasing extent. And that's what we're doing. So, what we need to do is, to stop expanding government, to not make any additional mandatory spending promises until we figured out, at a minimum, how we're going to deal with Social Security and Medicare. That 102 trillion, 65.5 trillion is Social Security and Medicare. And so we need to figure out what are we going to do with that, as well as what other types of reprioritizations and reductions in spending over time, and frankly, tax reform that will increase growth, but frankly, increase revenues as well. We're not going to be able to grow our way out of this problem. We can't just cut our way out of this problem. We can't just tax our way out of this problem. But it starts with the people helping politicians understand they need to make this a priority and make tough choices sooner rather than later, and that they can and should do so without losing their job.
What about people who say, well, the politicians are going to just keep spending money? I mean, if you think about it, we expanded the growth of government under a supposedly fiscal conservative administration in the heart of a pandemic in March of 2020. Now we have a new regime. They are equally concerned, it seems, about adding to the national debt. And I remember just 20 years ago, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, they were all about getting rid of the deficit. Now it seems that both parties don't even care anymore. Are you hearing differently?
Well, first understand that the last two presidents that were fiscally responsible were Bill Clinton and George Herbert Walker Bush. And we haven't had a president who was fiscally responsible since then. And we desperately need one who is, because leadership starts from the top, and the top is the President of the United States, who's the only person who's truly elected by all the people. You can't run a country by committee. That's what the Congress is. The committee is very dysfunctional right now and has been for a while. So we need to do that. But now you have so-called modern monetary theorists who assert that deficits and debt don't matter as long as you can borrow in your own reserve currency and print money, that you don't have to worry about it until you have excess inflation. Well, guess what? That's contrary to history. It's contrary to long-standing economic history. It's based on a flawed comparison to Japan. And now we're starting to have excess inflation. And so as a result, we need to recognize that we need to quit digging. We need to figure out a way that we're going to end up making these tough choices. And in my view, that means a statutory commission that will engage the American people, that will make recommendations with a guaranteed vote in Congress to give the Congress impetus and coverage to make these tough choices sooner rather than later and before we have a crisis.
I'm all for that. Do you get any takers in Washington? I mean, are people...
Well, we'll see. I'm trying to turn up the heat. I mean, I've got an op-ed now. I write op-eds quite frequently. I've got an op-ed that I just submitted this afternoon, hopefully for publication, that does several things. One, it notes that, while the bipartisan infrastructure bill wasn't perfect, And there are parts of it that I'm concerned about that by and large it was a net plus. But this next bill, the quote unquote Build Back Better bill, we need to draw the line on that. It should not pass because it is a further expansion of government. It is an increase in mandatory spending. There's all kinds of gimmicks that are being played to make it look like it's actually going to cost less than it's really going to cost. And as I assert in the op-ed, that you need to figure out how you're going to deliver the promises that you already have made before you start making new promises. The other thing I think we need is I'm involved in an effort to try to get a constitutional fiscal responsibility amendment that focuses on debt to GDP, using what's called Article 5 of the Constitution, which says if you get 2/3 of the states calling for it, then you have a limited constitutional convention for this purpose. They come up with something, and then 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. We already have at least 27 of the 34 states required, and it's pretty clear to me that Washington is out of touch and out of control, and it's time for the states to reassert themselves as provided for under the U.S. Constitution.
So I'm all pumped. So, folks, when we return, we're going to be back with the Honorable David M. Walker. Wrote the book. What's your latest book? America in 2040, Still a Superpower? Is that your latest book?
That's correct. The latest book is America in 2040, Still a Superpower, A Pathway to Success. It paints what things could look like if we don't change course internationally and domestically, and what do we need to do to create a better future.
And folks, we'll give that book to you for free when you schedule and keep your no obligation review. All you have to do is call us, schedule your 45-minute ultimate financial game plan. Call us now, 888-988-JOSH. 888-988-JOSH. Up next, we're going to talk about the dangerous modern monetary theory a little more. And why is it so popular? And have they infected the new administration? Well, now we've had about a year of the administration we currently have. But has modern monetary theory infected both parties? We'll also talk more about this book. This was a national bestseller from 2009, was Come Back America. I think we had you on the show back then promoting it. And
that's right.
American 2040, that was maybe the first time I ever had you on, back when I did local radio on WOBM, and then maybe when I was first came on WOR. But American 2040, that book was not as acclaimed as it should have been due to the pandemic. So I want you to talk about that and promote that a little bit, because it was really, when we return though,
self-published it.
We'll take a short break. Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. And we're back with David M. Walker, arguably the nation's foremost expert on the fiscal cliff. American 2040, I think it was one of these books that got glossed over because of the pandemic. A lot of books came out and they were very good contributions. So talk about that if people didn't get it.
Well, I think there's two reasons that the book didn't get as much notoriety as it should have, because as you pointed out, Josh, my book, Come Back America, which was published in 2010, was a national bestseller. And I actually think America in 2040 is actually a better book than Come Back America. It's more comprehensive and it's very, very timely. So COVID-19 had an impact on that. But I think the other thing that happened is I self-published it. I wasn't in it to make money. I was in it to impart knowledge. I wanted to get it out quickly before the 2020 elections. There's no way that a major publisher could have gotten it out that quickly. Believe it or not, I wrote the book in 6 weeks on my home computer. It took longer to get it published than it took me to write it. And so now I'm at the situation where I'm actually thinking about writing an appendix to the book, because so many things have happened in the last year, unfortunately, most of which are negative.
Yeah, I would like you to, because I think it's a timely wake-up call. And folks, go over to Amazon, get the book America in 2040, or we'll give it away to you for free. Call us at 888-988-JOSH. I'll buy it for you. Why is it so timely now? I mean, I know why, but tell our listeners.
Well, first, keep in mind, I taught the economics of national security at the Naval Academy. The good news was I could teach whatever I wanted. The bad news, I didn't have a textbook. And so I basically had to create the course from scratch based upon reports, articles, research studies, et cetera. And after I taught the course one semester, I said, well, Lord, I might as well write a book because of all the knowledge that I'm accumulating and imparting to the midshipmen. So I wrote this book, which is not a textbook. It's for the general public. It's broad. It's very timely because, we face new national security threats. We face a rising China who will pass us on GDP. They've already passed us on purchasing power parity GDP. They're going to pass us on gross GDP within the next 10 years or so. They have more embassies than we have. They have the second largest military in the world. They're dedicated to passing us. So we have that threat. We have new threats with regard to bio, with regard to space, with regard to cyber. We have changing alliances in the world. We've got a number of countries that are lying against our economic, our diplomatic, and our national security interests, including China, including Russia, including Iran, including North Korea. Domestically, our finances are out of control. We've got to put our finances back in order. We have growing gaps between the haves and the have-nots, which represent a domestic tranquility threat. And many other issues, including the fact that we've lost energy independence under this administration. We don't have control of the borders. So I basically go through all those issues and talk about what do we need to do to create a better future. And I remind people that you need to learn from history. Let me give you one example. Rome fell for several reasons: fiscal irresponsibility, political incivility, decline in moral values, overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Do those sound familiar, Josh?
Yeah.
It's important that we learn from history and not make the same mistakes that other great powers have made in the past.
And it's interesting you say moral. I think the moral decline is at the very basis of why, do people care about their children and grandchildren and the America that they will inherit? It really is a moral crisis.
I think the people do, Josh, and I proved that in my 2012 10,000-mile, 10 million a minute tour. Our total liabilities and unfunded promises were going up by 10 million a minute then. They're going up by that now or more based upon the way things are now. As I said, the people are ahead of the politicians. The problem is we've got too many career politicians. Most people don't want to lose their job involuntarily. You don't lose your job if you do tax cuts and additional government spending, which gives benefits to people. You do potentially risk losing your job if you have tax increases and or social insurance reforms and spending reductions. Even though they're needed, they're going to happen. There's no question about it. And so that's why I say what you have to do is engage the public in a meaningful way to till the ground for these tough choices, and then have a mechanism that will set the table with a guaranteed vote in Congress. And as I said before, also to try to provide some type of constitutional control, because the debt ceiling limit has been a dismal failure.
Every so often we hear about this debt ceiling, and I'm beginning to think it doesn't even matter anymore. It matters that they're spending our kids and grandkids into oblivion, but it doesn't even, they keep raising the debt ceiling. Why should they not raise the debt ceiling? Because every year we hear about this, and then they raise it.
First,
and the media says, oh, the world's going to end if they don't raise the debt ceiling, and then nothing happens.
Well, first, we're the only major industrialized nation with a debt ceiling. It's dumb. It doesn't work. All right. Because basically the Congress has already set tax policy and spending policy, which automatically means that you're going to have to raise it. All right. It was supposed to be a mechanism that would force serious discussion and debate and hopefully decision making with regard to tax and spending policy. But it has not. It has become a political football. And the U.S. obviously doesn't want to default on its obligations. And in fact, the U.S. will never default on its debt obligations because they're guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. Nothing else is guaranteed. Social Security is not guaranteed. Medicare is not guaranteed. Any other government program is not guaranteed by the Constitution. Only debt of the United States and accumulated interest. But that's why I say what we need to do is we need to go to something that is meaningful that encourages economic growth, but guarantees fiscal responsibility, and that's debt to GDP. We need to make sure that the denominator, which is the GDP, grows faster than the numerator. As long as the denominator grows faster than the numerator, you're making progress. The problem is that based on known demographic trends, rising healthcare costs, and now increasing inflation, we've got a situation where we're going to have to make some tough choices on social insurance reforms, on reprioritizing and reducing projected other spending, and on tax reform that will generate more revenues, but not just through growth, through changes in how we tax.
Wonderful. David M. Walker will be back after these messages asking him what's a good plan, kind of his plan for dummies. Where do we cut taxes or raise revenue? Where do we increase taxes? Where do we cut spending? Up next, this is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback, and we'll talk about China's intellectual property theft and his expertise on America's financial crisis as it relates to national security. Up next, this is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. And we're back with David M. Walker, author of our free book giveaway today, America in 2040, Still a Superpower. You can call me at 888-988-JOSH right now. Request a free year-end review, and you get that book free when you schedule and keep your no-obligation review. Or you can go to Amazon or wherever books are sold and just search for America in 2040, Still a Superpower, a pathway to success. So before I left off from the break, I talked about a plan for dummies. So what do we do? What is your kind of recipe 101? You mentioned kind of do a debt to GDP ratio. Is there a certain formula that you would recommend on that? And then if you would give a prescription to, I know you're down in Virginia. We have there's a new governor in Virginia. Maybe there'll be new senators, in a year. What would be your recipe for success on the fiscal deficit that we're facing today?
Well, that's what the book's all about. What the book talks about is, among other things, was the result of that 10 million a minute tour that I talked to you about in 2012. What I did in that tour was I had a number of special town hall meetings that lasted for over half a day. I partnered with former Vice Chairman of the Fed, former OMB Director, former CBO Director, Alice Rivlin, may God rest her soul. We engaged representative groups of voters, demographically representative groups of voters in the North and the South, about where we are, where we're headed, how we compare to others, the adverse consequences of failing to act, the benefits of acting. We then got them to agree by over 90% on a set of principles and values to guide reform, a specific goal of debt to GDP, which back then was 60%. We're well over 100 now. I think a more realistic goal now is 90%, okay? By a date certain, back then it was 2030. Today, I think a more realistic goal is probably 2035 based upon where we are now. We got them to agree on 6 principles and values that would guide these reforms, which you'd want to ask me the question I'll come back to. And then we talked about taxes, Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, defense, government organization operations, and political reforms. And we got 72 to 97% agreement on specific reforms that, if enacted, would achieve the goal consistent with the principles and values. And now, that's the approach you need to take. That was not the approach that was taken by the Simpson-Bowles Commission in 2010. And that commission was also not a statutory commission, meaning that there was not a buy-in by the President of Congress up front, and it wasn't guaranteed a vote. Whatever it recommended was not guaranteed a vote. So we need to recognize the need to engage the American people. We need a statutory mechanism that will help to get that done, and that will also be able to make recommendations to Congress. And we need to leverage social media and traditional media as part of this public education and engagement campaign, which is not typically the way Washington works. Washington thinks they know all the answers, and they come up with the answers and they go out and try to sell them. That doesn't work, and it won't get this problem solved.
So, what are those 6 principles? Kind of a follow-up to that.
There are six. The first one is very important. It's called pro-growth. You want policies that will help to grow the economy, because keep in mind the metric is debt to GDP. So you want to grow the denominator, which is GDP, faster than the numerator. That's what we did after World War II. It worked. But now, due to our demographic trends and other challenges, we've got to make tough choices that we didn't have to make then. Secondly, it needs to be, it needs to be culturally acceptable. With regard to the American public, there's a limit as to how much they're going to allow themselves to be taxed. We're not Europe. We have faster economic growth in Europe. We have more opportunity than Europe. We have a bigger middle class than Europe, and we don't want to give that up. It needs to be mathematical integrity. You got to have a plan that you don't play games with the numbers, and actually will work mathematically, if you will. It has to be politically feasible. You've got to be able to get a majority of votes in the House. You've got to be able to pass the Senate, and then you've got to be able to get the signature of the President of the United States. That's important. You need to have meaningful bipartisan support. You've got to have at least 20% of whoever the minority party is to be able to support it, because if you don't have that, then the people won't deem it to be fair, and it probably won't be sustainable over time because control changes from time to time. And so those are a few of the principles. And importantly, most of our decision making needs to be based on that. They need to be based upon principles and values, a specific goal, and then what are we going to do in order to achieve that goal consistent with those principles and values.
Fantastic. So, what are I just remember there was a day when you had remember Harold Ford Jr. was sort of like the new
he was on my advisory board. I see Harold on TV all the time now.
And Harold was kind of the new Democrat, sort of like the Bill Clinton type. And then that seemed to be supplanted. I don't know if Harold Ford Jr., did he go up against Nancy Pelosi in the early 2000s for leadership? And then once he kind of got pushed aside, that sort of fiscal conservatism on the Democratic side seemed to wane. And really, frankly, even the Republicans, I remember when Thomas Massey a year or two ago said, hey, why are we spending all this money on this and this? People told him to shut up. And the president, former president, was using his name as a curse word. So, maybe I'm overly negative, but are you getting politicians now to wake up? Are they starting to wake up? I know we have to push it from the people
unfortunately,
and the electorate.
Yeah. Well, Harold ran for the Senate in Tennessee and was not successful, and then dropped out of elective politics. Harold was on the board of the Come Back America Initiative, which is the not-for-profit that I started after the Peterson Foundation, which did the 10 Million a Minute tour, which, by the way, was funded largely by Ross Perot, Sr. And, may God rest his soul as well. And so, look, too much of the Congress is on the far right or the far left. There's not much of a sensible center. There is a glimmer of hope there. I'm one of the national co-founders of a group called No Labels. You can find out more about it at nolabels.org. They've helped to create the problem solvers in the House, which is 58 members, half Democrat, half Republican, trying to work together. They've helped to create the bicameral group, which includes senators and members of Congress trying to work together across the Capitol to try to be able to get things done. Those groups were integral for and essential for the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I'm hoping that those groups are going to help to make sure that we don't end up passing the Build Back Better bill for the reasons that I've talked to you about. We need to take care of what we've already promised before we start making new promises. But ultimately, as I say, the people are ahead of the politicians. So the key is you have to engage the people in a meaningful way so that they put pressure on politicians to be able to make the right choices sooner rather than later. And ideally, you'd want a president who makes this a priority, because there's only one person who has the bully pulpit, and that's the president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful now. You're giving me some hope. So basically, what you're saying is there aren't a lot of politicians that go to you, but we have to be the drivers. We have to believe, because there was a time I remember when Ross Perot was a joke with his he would go out there with the board and he would give his lessons on the debt, but it started to resonate. And when you talk to people, where I'm seeing it resonate. I want your take on this. There's a whole group of budding people who were uninterested in politics, and now they're part of the Bitcoin community. I want your take on Bitcoiners are sort of turned off by all of the government spending, and in a way, they're voting with their money. So I want your take on Bitcoin, national security. I think there's a lot of implications there. If the dollar kind of loses its status as the world reserve currency, it's going to be a nightmare for the U.S. I want to get your take on that when we return with David M. Walker, author of American 2040. I want you all to go out and get that book on Amazon today. Or do you have a website? Do you have a website where you can promote that book, or go to Amazon?
DeficitRanger.com. The book's on there. You can get it Amazon. You can get it from the publisher as well, which is authorhouse.com. It's all online because it's a just-in-time printing.
Okay, DeficitRanger.com. Go there, buy the book, or I'll buy you one, folks, if you call us at 888-988-JOSH for the no obligation review. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with the Honorable David M. Walker, who is arguably one of the foremost experts on our big deficit and what we can do in a bipartisan fashion to solve our nation's fiscal cliff. I mean, I'm like you. Whenever people, I don't even remember a politician that really sensibly talked about the national debt, I guess, in the last so many years. But Ross Perot resonated and people got it. I think people are getting it now as they see inflation. Inflation this week, 6+%. I think it's a signal that people got to wake up. I asked you about Bitcoin before we had the break. Do you deal with the Bitcoin community at all? They seem like they would resonate.
I don't. I have not invested in Bitcoin because I still am not comfortable with what backs it, and how do I convert it back to dollars if I want to. I also get concerned because I know that Bitcoin is used to evade taxes by a lot of people, and we've got a problem with that in this country and other countries, and it's also used for a lot of illegal activity as well. So it's an investment. It's a speculative investment. Coming back to something else that you said is, the United States. The United States right now has about 60% of the global reserve currency. I do think we're going to lose market share. I don't think we're going to lose our status as a global reserve currency, but I do think that we're going to lose market share. And I think that's likely to accelerate. The reduction of market share is likely to accelerate if we don't put our finances in order. Because keep in mind, economic strength is a precursor to the rise and fall of nations. If you don't have a strong economy, you will not be able to become or maintain your status as a superpower. And superpower being global economic power, global diplomatic power, global military power, and global cultural influence. We have that today. The Soviet Union never had that. They did not have global they didn't have global economic power. They didn't have global cultural influence. They had the diplomatic, they had the military. They didn't have the other. But now we have China, which does. And they're on the rise, and we got to get our act together. Can we? Yes. Will we? I hope and pray we do.
Yeah, I do too. Now, you said 60% of the current reserve currency status. What was it 20 years ago?
It has been higher, but it's been about 60%, for several decades now. All right. But you got to keep in mind, we got our act together in the late 1990s.
Yeah.
We had the first 4 years I was Comptroller General of the United States, we had a surplus. In 2 of those 4 years, we actually paid down debt. And believe it or not, at one point in time, the United States was debt-free, 1835 under Andrew Jackson. That will never happen again. It doesn't need to happen again. Sometimes you have to run deficits. Not all debt is bad, but too much debt is bad because it reduces economic growth. And in addition to that, reducing economic growth means you have less opportunity, means you have less of an ability to be able to fund programs, including defense. Keep in mind, we've lost control of the budget. Over 70% of the budget of the United States government is on autopilot. We've written a blank check for mandatory spending programs. And what gets squeezed? Discretionary spending. And what's the biggest part of discretionary spending? Defense. In fact, every express and enumerated responsibility and vision for the federal government by our nation's founders were in discretionary spending. And yet that's what's getting squeezed. So these are not trends that portend a brighter future. But importantly, we can change this. Other countries have done this. I mean, Sweden, for example, had terrible financial crisis in the 1990s. They made tough choices. By the way, Sweden has socialized medicine cradle to grave, but they don't write a blank check for health care. They have a budget on how much they'll spend on it because they know it can bankrupt the country. We haven't learned that lesson yet.
What about I do want to get your take on the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better bill. So there talks about we're at about a $1.25 trillion, 1.75 trillion of new spending in the new bill. And then there's the human infrastructure bill. Do you want to break down the differences and then what?
Well, first, there are 2 bills. Okay. The first bill has already passed the Senate and the House, and it's set to be signed by the president on Monday. It is the critical infrastructure bill. It's roads, bridges, airports, marine ports, broadband, things that are more traditional hard infrastructure, if you will. It also includes $9 billion to pay to have electric charging stations all over the country. My question on that is, I don't recall the U.S. taxpayer paying to have gas stations all over the country, so I really don't know why the U.S. taxpayer should be paying for that. So there are good and bad things about the bill, but I think it's a net positive. It will be signed by the president on Monday. The next one they called human infrastructure. Look, it's an expansion of mandatory spending. It's an expansion of social welfare programs, either through direct spending on things like housing or indirect spending, meaning tax preferences or whatever for things like childcare. They're saying that they only want to do it for a stated period of time, but it's very well known that they want it to be permanent. They don't end up properly targeting it from a means testing standpoint. They don't have a work requirement for it. And in many cases, they're willing to allow these things to go to illegal immigrants. And I come back to where I started. When you're already in a $102 trillion hole, when you've already lost control of your budget, where over 70% of the budget you've written a blank check, when debt to GDP is about to hit record levels and rising, when inflation is starting to go up, this is not something you want to do. We need to figure out how we're going to put our own financial house in order before we start trying to do more. And by the way, depending on how this thing was structured, it actually might discourage more employment rather than encouraging it. If you don't have a work requirement before you end up getting help for things like childcare, then that can provide additional revenue for you not to have to go to work. Because one of the problems the government had in the last year is they ended up expanding unemployment benefits and other things such that it actually was an economic disincentive to go back to work, especially for people who were concerned about their health because of COVID-19.
Man. And what about inflation? I think inflation is the biggest reminder that the debt does matter, that modern monetary theory doesn't work. How do you, when you talk to people, are you finding that they're waking up due to inflation?
There's absolutely no question, Josh, that inflation is hitting home. We were energy independent as recently as a year ago. We were an all exporting nation a year ago. Now we are relying increasingly on imports in regions of the world who, in many cases, don't like us, and it's not in their economic interest to cooperate with what we want them to do. Russia, Saudi Arabia, et cetera. But people are feeling it. When gas prices have gone up dramatically. Wait till this winter. You're going to see what's going to happen with home heating oil and natural gas and things of that nature. People are going to feel it. Food prices are going up. When petroleum prices go up, that has a ripple effect through the entire economy. You combine that with the supply chain problem that we have right now. People are feeling this, and yet the proposals that are out there are likely to make it worse, not better. When you end up spending a lot more money in a situation like this, that's gonna fuel the pump, and that's going to increase pressure for inflation, not decrease.
Yeah, and if people worry, I always tell people money isn't free. All these government programs aren't free. They're devaluing our currency. They're making the price of bread. If you go to buy bread, the 99-cent bread, I don't particularly buy the 99-cent bread. I don't like it. My wife buys the $5 organic bread. The $5 organic bread, much to my chagrin, is now $6. That's a 20%
Everything's gone up.
And even
Everything's
the
gone
99-cent
up.
bread, by the way, I was going to tell you, the 99-cent bread is now $1.30. It's a 30% increase in a year.
Well, I've started going to the grocery store with my wife now that I'm semi-retired, and obviously I have to buy fuel for my car as well. And so, I can see it, I can feel it, but frankly, the people that are affected the most are lower and lower middle income individuals. They're the ones that are affected the most. And let's face it, it's not a tax, but it has an effective tax, and it's involuntary.
Yeah, it's a stealth tax. So we'll pause for our final break of the hour, concluding thoughts with David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the U.S. and foremost expert on the debt. And folks, pick up the book America in 2040, Still a Superpower. It'll be your free gift when you schedule and keep your no obligation review. Call us at 888-988-JOSH, or you can go to his website, deficitranger.com. That's deficitranger.com, or go call us 888-988-JOSH, and I'll give you the book because I think the message is so meaningful. And I really think the book needs more play. America in 2040, due to COVID. A lot of good authors in 2020, they released books. I mean, I released a book a year before COVID. We're going to do this whole tour in 2020. That got stopped. It was an Amazon bestseller, but didn't sell as many as I'd like. But America in 2040, get it today, folks, or call my office. We'll give it to you for free. 888-988-JOSH. When you schedule and keep your no obligation review, we'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Parting thoughts with David M. Walker. So I always want to call you Dr. Walker. What do people call you? Professor Walker, Dr. Walker? What do your students
call me Dave. When I was Comptroller General, I was called General. When I was at the Naval Academy, I was called Professor. But I would tell, sometimes people try to call me Mr. Walker or whatever else. I said, my name's Dave.
That's great. So, Dave, as we talk about national security, what you did at Naval Academy, talk about the link between economic security and national security. I asked you about Bitcoin earlier because I see a link that as people are losing faith in the U.S.'s ability to keep its fiscal house in order, it's creating almost a whole new ecosystem of what does Bitcoin now have, like a $1 to $2 trillion market cap?
Yeah.
cryptocurrency general.
Well, there's no
trillion.
question. Let's talk about a key word, Josh, a key word. That word is confidence. When people lose confidence, things can spin out of control very quickly. And I do believe there is a link. I do believe there is a link for people that are behind Bitcoin that are concerned with the fact that most of the currencies in the world today, including the dollar or fiat currencies, they're not backed by anything other than full faith and credit of the government. So to the extent that you're losing confidence in the government, then obviously that could have an adverse impact. But there's a lot of speculation associated with it. And as I said, who really backs it, and how easy is it to cash out if you want to cash out? But what was the other issue that you wanted to go into, John? Oh, how does it relate to national security? Here's the key issue. As I said earlier, the key to a rise as a superpower and the key to a decline as a superpower is how strong is your economy. If you've got a strong economy, you're able to fund a number of things, including national defense. Right now, our budget, the budget, 70% of spending every year plus and increasing is on autopilot. The Defense Department is the biggest part of so-called discretionary spending, and its percentage of the overall federal budget has declined dramatically in the last several decades. And to the extent that the Congress doesn't restructure mandatory spending or somehow limit mandatory spending, and to the extent that the Congress doesn't want to raise additional revenues, then that means there's more and more pressure being brought to bear on defense and other discretionary spending. So, our current policies are undercutting economic growth. Our current policies are putting more pressure on discretionary spending. Our current policies are also stoking inflation. And we're in danger of re-experiencing something called stagflation, which we experienced in the late 70s, which was very slow economic growth and high inflation. We don't want to repeat that again. And it's important that we learn those lessons and take steps to make sure that we don't do that.
And it kind of looks like we are repeating that, right? I mean, doesn't it feel like we're in the 70s all over again a little bit? I mean, some of it could be supply chain. What's your take on that?
So there are similarities. There's no question. But and frankly, we don't have any Paul Volckers. I mean, let's look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. They haven't been acting very independent. They're holding down interest rates at artificially low levels, especially in light of what inflation is, okay? They are buying most of the new debt that's being issued by the United States, which I call that self-dealing in our own debt. You can do those things in the short term to deal with the crisis. You can't do those things over time or in the normal course. And because of the Federal Reserve has done that, that has caused the modern monetary theorists to say, hey, let's grow government. Let's don't worry about deficits. Let's don't worry about debt because interest rates are low. And therefore we can carry a lot higher debt burden. Well, that assumes that interest rates are always going to stay low. That's not a prudent assumption, and it is directly contrary to history. All right. And so I think, we're playing a dangerous game right now. The good news is America is a great country. It's still the greatest country on earth. If we learn from history, if we end up, taking the right kind of steps to engage the American people, put mechanisms in place that will enable us to make these tough choices, we can course correct, and we can make sure that our future is better than our past. And that's why I'm in this fight. I'm in this fight for our future. It's not about me. It's really not even about my kids because I think they're going to be okay. But I'm very concerned about my grandkids. What's going on now is irresponsible, unethical, and immoral, and it needs to stop.
That's a great way to conclude this exciting interview. And parting last minute of the interview, anything you would like to add or promote for our listeners today?
Well, I would ask you to, think about getting the book. You get it online at either Amazon or authorhouse.com. It's not in bookstores because it's just available online, just-in-time printing, if you will. I think it's very timely. It's very informative, and I think, as I said, it's better than my last book, which was a national bestseller. The other thing is that you need to engage your elected officials and let them know that you're concerned about what's happening and what's not happening. Because ultimately, the people are going to have to be the biggest part of this solution because Congress and Washington's a lag indicator. We need to have tough choices sooner rather than later. But don't give up hope. We're still the greatest country on earth. And yes, our future can be better than our past.
Great way to conclude. America in 2040, folks. Get the book on Amazon, Deficit Ranger, or call our office at 888-988-JOSH for your free copy. When you schedule your year-end review, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. Great to have you on again, as always. David Walker, American 2040 author and former controller of the U.S. government.
The preceding program was sponsored by the Jelensky Advisory Group.
Any awards, rankings, or recognition by unaffiliated third parties or publications, including 5-Star Wealth Manager, Advisory of the Year finalist by Senior Market Advisor, and Top of the $1 Million Roundtable, are in no way indicative of the advisor's future performance or any individual client's investment success. No award, ranking, or recognition should be construed as a current or past endorsement of Josh Jelensky or Wealth Quarterback LLC. Information regarding specific awards, rankings, or recognitions is available on the Wealth Quarterback website at www.jelensky.org. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. Investment strategies such as asset allocation, diversification, or rebalancing do not assure or guarantee better performance and cannot eliminate the risk of investment losses. There are no guarantees that a portfolio employing these or any other strategy will outperform a portfolio that does not engage in such strategies. This broadcast should not be construed by any client or prospective client as a solicitation to effect or attempt to effect transactions in securities or the rendering of personalized investment advice. Due to various factors, including changing market conditions, the information discussed in this broadcast may no longer be reflective of current positions or recommendations. While information presented is believed to be factual and up to date, Josh Jelensky and Wealth Quarterback do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. The tax and estate planning information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Advisory services offered through Wealth Quarterback LLC.